The gunshot echoed through the Colorado Rockies just as Delilah Preston's wagon wheel splintered apart, sending her careening toward the edge of a ravine in the summer of 1878. She screamed as the wagon tipped, her hands white-knuckled on the reins as her two horses whinnied in panic. The supplies she'd been transporting from Trinidad back to her father's failing ranch scattered across the rocky ground. Just as the wagon began its fatal slide toward the drop, a massive hand clamped onto the wooden frame, and another seized the harness of her led horse. The man who had appeared seemed to materialize from the mountain itself. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders impossibly broad beneath a worn leather vest that strained against muscles hardened by years of surviving in the wilderness. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered his jaw. With a strength that defied belief, he hauled the horse backward, his biceps bulging as he dragged the entire wagon away from certain death. Delilah sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs as the stranger secured her wagon on stable ground. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes were a startling gray blue, like storm clouds over mountain peaks. "You hurt?" His voice rumbled deep in his chest, rough from disuse. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her entire body had begun to shake, the delayed reaction to how close she had come to dying setting in all at once. The mountain man noticed. His expression softened slightly, and he moved toward the wagon more slowly. "Easy now, you're safe. Name's Fletcher Wallace. Let me help you down." He reached up, his large hands spanning her waist, and Delilah felt the trembling intensify. It had been 3 years since any man had touched her, not since Thomas Garrett had tried to force himself on her in the barn. Her father had run him off with a shotgun, but the damage had been done. She had barely let anyone near her since. Fletcher felt the violent shaking beneath his palms and immediately released her, stepping back with his hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt you, miss. Just trying to help." Delilah forced herself to breathe. This man had just saved her life. He had kind eyes despite his intimidating appearance. Thank you, I'm sorry. I'm Delilah Preston." "You live nearby?" Fletcher kept his distance, his voice gentler than before. "The Preston Ranch, about 5 miles east." She looked at her broken wheel and felt tears prick her eyes. Her father needed the supplies she had purchased with the last of their money. They were already behind on the loan payment to the bank. "I don't know how I'm going to get home." Fletcher examined the wheel. "This is split clean through. You won't be riding this wagon anywhere today." He glanced at the sky, noting the afternoon sun. "I can help you get your supplies back to your ranch, but we'll need to make 2 trips. I've got a camp about a mile north. We can store what we can't carry there, and I'll bring it to you tomorrow." "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask, I'm offering." He began gathering the scattered items, his movements efficient and sure. "Besides, a woman alone out here with a broken wagon is asking for trouble. There's been talk of the Sanderson gang working these parts." Delilah had heard the rumors, too. The gang had robbed 2 stagecoaches in the past month. She climbed down from the wagon carefully, testing her legs. Her dress was dusty and torn at the hem, but otherwise she was unharmed. As she helped Fletcher collect the supplies, she studied him from the corner of her eye. Everything about him spoke of isolation and self-reliance. His clothes were worn but well-maintained, his gear practical and obviously used. A large hunting knife hung at his belt, and she could see the stock of a rifle on his horse, a massive roan stallion that waited patiently nearby. "How long have you been in these mountains?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. 5 years, give or take." He hoisted a 100-pound sack of flour over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. "Came out here after the war." "Which side? Does it matter now?" His tone wasn't harsh, just weary. "Too many good men died on both sides." They worked in companionable silence after that, and Delilah found her trembling had subsided. Fletcher never came too close, always giving her space, always telegraphing his movements so she wouldn't be startled. It was considerate in a way she hadn't expected from a mountain man. When they had loaded everything they could carry onto Fletcher's horse and fashioned a travois for the rest, the sun had begun its descent toward the peaks. Fletcher secured the remaining supplies at his camp, which turned out to be a well-constructed lean-to with a stone fire pit and neat stacks of firewood. Everything was orderly, almost military in its precision. The journey to the Preston Ranch took nearly 3 hours, with Fletcher leading his heavily laden horse and Delilah walking beside him. She told him about her father, about how her mother had died 2 winters ago from pneumonia, about how they were struggling to keep the ranch afloat with just the 2 of them working it. "We used to have 3 hired hands, but we can't afford to pay anyone now. Pa's back isn't what it used to be, and I do what I can, but it's not enough." She kicked at a stone on the trail. "The bank is threatening to foreclose. We have until the end of August to come up with $300. Fletcher listened without judgment, occasionally nodding. When they finally reached the ranch as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, he helped her unload the supplies onto the porch of the weathered ranch house. Daniel Preston emerged, a grizzled man in his late 50s with suspicious eyes and a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Who's this?" "Pa, this is Fletcher Wallace. He saved my life today when the wheel broke." Delilah quickly explained what had happened, and she watched her father's expression shift from suspicion to grudging gratitude. "I'm obliged to you," Daniel said, lowering the shotgun. "We don't have much, but you're welcome to supper and a bed in the barn for the night." "Appreciate it, but I need to get back to my camp before full dark." Fletcher tipped his hat to Delilah. "I'll bring the rest of your supplies by tomorrow afternoon." "You don't have to do that," Delilah said, though she hoped he would. "A man keeps his word." Fletcher swung up onto his horse with an easy grace that belied his size. "Besides, I could use the company. Gets quiet up in those mountains." Daniel watched him ride away, then turned to his daughter. "He seems decent enough for a hermit." "He was kind, Pa, really kind." Delilah carried a sack of flour inside, but her mind was already on tomorrow afternoon. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and thought about Fletcher's hands on her waist, about how she had trembled not just from fear, but from something else entirely. He had noticed her panic and immediately given her space. No man had ever done that before. They always pushed, always demanded, always took what they wanted without asking. The next day dragged endlessly. Delilah did her chores with unusual vigor, mucking out the horse stalls, feeding the chickens, mending a section of fence that had come loose. She changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on her blue calico, the one that her mother had said brought out her eyes. "You're awful particular today," Daniel observed, a knowing look in his eye. "I'm just being presentable. It's polite." Delilah felt her cheeks heat. "Uh-huh." Her father hid a smile behind his coffee cup. Fletcher arrived just after 2 o'clock, the rest of their supplies secured on his horse and a smaller travois. He had cleaned up some, his hair pulled back and his beard trimmed. Delilah felt her pulse quicken at the sight of him. "Brought everything," he said, beginning to unload. "The flour stayed dry at my camp." Daniel came out to help, and together the 3 of them moved the supplies into the house in the small barn. When they finished, Delilah poured cool water from the well and brought Fletcher a cup. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and she felt that trembling start again. This time it wasn't fear. Fletcher's eyes met hers, and she saw recognition there, understanding. "Thank you," she said softly. "My pleasure, Miss Preston." He drank deeply, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You've got a nice place here. Good land." "It could be if we could afford to work it properly." Daniel had joined them, his eyes surveying their struggling ranch with a mixture of pride and sadness. "But that takes money and hands, and we're short on both." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "I could help out some. I don't have much use for money up in the mountains, and I know my way around a ranch. Grew up on one in Wyoming before the war." "We can't pay you," Daniel said bluntly. "Did I ask for pay?" Fletcher's tone was mild. "I'm offering to help neighbors. That's what people do, or used to anyway." Delilah felt hope bloom in her chest, immediately followed by worry. Having Fletcher around would mean being near him, feeling this confusing mixture of attraction and nervousness. But they needed help desperately, and he was offering freely. "We couldn't impose," she began, but her father cut her off. "We'd be grateful for the help," Daniel said, extending his hand. "But you'll take supper with us every night you work, and we'll share what we have. I won't take charity." "Fair enough." Fletcher shook his hand, his grip firm. "I'll come down tomorrow morning and we can see what needs doing most." After Fletcher left, Daniel turned to his daughter. "That man's interested in you." "Pay," Delilah's face flamed. "I'm old, not blind. And you're interested back unless I miss my guess. He held up a hand when she started to protest. He seems like a good man, Delilah, better than most. But you take your time figuring out what you want. No need to rush anything. That night, Delilah lay awake again, her mind full of gray-blue eyes and gentle hands that had pulled back the moment they felt her fear. She thought about Thomas Garrett and how he had grabbed her, how his touch had made her skin crawl, how he had laughed at her protests. Fletcher was nothing like that. Fletcher had stepped away. Fletcher had given her space and time. Maybe, she thought, not all men were like Thomas. Maybe some were like Fletcher. Over the next 2 weeks, Fletcher became a fixture at the Preston ranch. He arrived each morning as the sun crested the mountains, worked until evening, then returned to his camp in the high country. He was tireless, repairing fences, reinforcing the barn, helping Daniel with the small herd of cattle they still maintained. His skill and strength made jobs that would have taken days take only hours. Delilah worked alongside them when she could, and she noticed how Fletcher always positioned himself to give her space. If she came near, he would step back or turn to give her room. If they had to work together, he moved slowly, predictably, letting her set the distance between them. He never crowded her, never trapped her, never made her feel like she couldn't escape if she needed to. Slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, Delilah's anxiety around him began to ease. She found herself standing a little closer, staying a little longer when she brought water or helped with a task. Fletcher never pushed, never took advantage. He simply accepted whatever proximity she offered and waited for more. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of the barn roof, Delilah felt brave enough to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Why aren't you married, Fletcher? You're a good man. You must have had opportunities." Fletcher hammered in a nail before answering, his movements precise. "I was married once, before the war. Sarah was her name. She died of cholera while I was away fighting. By the time I got word and made it home, she'd been in the ground 3 months. He paused, his jaw tight. After that, I didn't see much point in staying around people. Came up into the mountains and figured I'd stay there. I'm sorry. Delilah's heart ached for him. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. He glanced at her, then away. But being alone gets old after a while. A man can only talk to his horse for so many years before he starts to feel the lack of human company. Is that why you're helping us? Partly. He set down his hammer and looked at her directly. And partly because I wanted to spend time with you. The honesty of it stole her breath. Delilah felt the familiar trembling start, but this time it was different. This time it was anticipation mixed with the fear. Fletcher, I need to tell you something. I'm listening. She told him about Thomas Garrett, about what he had tried to do, about how she had barely let anyone touch her since. The words came haltingly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. Fletcher's expression grew dark as she spoke, but he stayed still, let her finish. That's why I shake when you're near sometimes, she said finally. It's not because of you. It's because of what he did, what he tried to do. And I'm sorry, because you've been nothing but kind, and you deserve better than a woman who flinches at shadows. Don't apologize. Fletcher's voice was rough with emotion. What he did wasn't your fault, and how you feel now isn't something to be sorry for. Any man worth his salt would understand that. He paused, then added softly, I'd wait a lifetime for you to feel comfortable with me, Delilah, however long it takes, whatever you need. I'm not going anywhere. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You mean that? Every word. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and held it out to her, careful not to reach too far, letting her take it from his hand. We'll go at your pace, whatever that looks like, and if you decide you don't want more than friendship, I'll accept that too. I do want more, Delilah said, surprising herself with the admission. I'm just scared. Fear's not a bad thing, it keeps us safe, but maybe over time you'll learn you don't have to be scared of me. He picked up his hammer again. Now, let's finish this roof before your father comes out and finds us talking instead of working. The gentle humor made her smile through her tears. As they returned to work, Delilah felt something shift inside her. Fletcher had given her the most precious gift, permission to be broken and time to heal. The following weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Fletcher continued to work at the ranch, and the place began to transform under his capable hands. Fences stood straight, the barn stopped leaking, the corral was reinforced. Daniel's spirits lifted as their prospects improved, though the specter of the bank loan still loomed. Delilah found herself increasingly drawn to Fletcher. She would catch herself watching him work, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the competent way he handled every task. More importantly, she admired his patience, his gentleness with her and with the animals, the quiet strength that needed no assertion. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Fletcher said, "I've been thinking about that loan payment you mentioned. $300 is a lot of money." "It might as well be 3,000, Daniel said bitterly. "We'll never raise it in time. What if we drove some cattle down to Trinidad? There's usually buyers there." Fletcher leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Between what you've got here and some Mustangs I could catch up in the high country, we might make enough." "We don't have enough cattle to make that kind of money," Delilah pointed out. "No, but we could gather strays. There's plenty of unmarked cattle running wild in these parts, left over from ranches that folded during the hard years. It's legal to claim and brand strays. With the three of us working together, we could gather a decent herd in a few weeks." Daniel stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's risky. The Sanderson gang has been hitting cattle drives." "Then we'll need to be smart about it." Fletcher's eyes gleamed with determination. "I know these mountains better than anyone. We can take routes they won't expect, move fast and quiet." "It might work," Delilah said slowly, excitement building in her chest. "It's better than sitting here waiting to lose everything." They spent the rest of the evening planning. Fletcher would spend the next week catching Mustangs from the wild herds he knew ran in the high valleys. Daniel and Delilah would start gathering strays from the surrounding territory. Then they would make the drive to Trinidad together, sell everything they could, and pray it was enough. The work was hard and dangerous. Delilah rode out each day with her father, searching ravines and hidden meadows for stray cattle. They found scattered longhorns, half wild and skittish, and slowly drove them back to the ranch. Meanwhile, Fletcher disappeared into the mountains, returning every few days with strings of wild horses, their eyes rolling and their hooves striking sparks from the stone. Breaking the horses fell to Fletcher, and Delilah watched in fascination as he worked. He never used force, never beat them into submission. Instead, he spent hours earning their trust, speaking softly, moving patiently until the wildness eased and they accepted his touch. "That's how you gentle a frightened creature," her father observed one evening, "with time and patience." Delilah knew he wasn't just talking about horses. One afternoon, while Fletcher was working with a particularly difficult Mustang mare, the horse suddenly reared, her hooves lashing out. Fletcher dodged, but not quite fast enough. One hoof caught his shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him into the corral fence. "Fletcher!" Delilah dropped the bucket she was carrying and ran to him without thinking. He had slid down the fence and was clutching his shoulder, his face pale beneath his tan. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his injury. "Let me see." "I'm all right," he gritted out, but when he tried to move his arm, he gasped in pain. "You're not all right. Stop being stubborn." Delilah carefully helped him pull his shirt aside, revealing an ugly bruise already spreading across his shoulder. She probed gently, and he hissed through his teeth. "I don't think anything's broken, but you're going to be sore for a while." It wasn't until she had helped him to the porch and brought cool cloths for the swelling that Delilah realized what she had done. She had touched him without hesitation, had pressed against his side to support his weight, had put her hands on his bare skin without trembling once. Fletcher had noticed, too. When she handed him a cup of water, he caught her hand gently. "Thank you. You're welcome." She didn't pull away. His hand was warm and calloused, strong but gentle. Her heart raced, but it wasn't panic. It was something else entirely, something that made her skin tingle and her breath catch. "Delilah," he said softly, "I need you to know something. The way I feel about you, it's not just passing fancy. I'm in love with you. Have been for weeks now, but I won't push you, won't ask for more than you can give." "I love you too," she whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I'm still scared sometimes, but I love you." Fletcher's face transformed, joy breaking across his features like sunrise over the mountains. "Can I kiss you?" The fact that he asked, that he waited for permission, made her love him even more. Yes. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull back. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, and nothing like the rough, unwanted kiss Thomas Garrett had stolen. This was a gift, freely given and received. Delilah melted into it, her hand coming up to rest against his uninjured shoulder. When they finally broke apart, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "We'll go as slow as you need." "I know." And she did know, and she trusted him completely. Daniel cleared his throat from the doorway, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. "I take it you two have an understanding?" "If Delilah will have me, I'd like to court her proper," Fletcher said, his arm still around her waist. "I believe she's made her feelings clear." Daniel tried to look stern but failed, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Just remember, I still have that shotgun." "Pa!" Delilah laughed, her face burning. The next few weeks were the happiest Delilah could remember since her mother's death. Fletcher's shoulder healed quickly, and they continued preparing for the cattle drive. But now, stolen moments punctuated the work. A kiss in the barn, holding hands as they walked the fence line, sitting close on the porch in the evenings. Fletcher continued to be patient, never pushing beyond what Delilah offered. When she tensed up, he backed off. When she leaned closer, he welcomed her warmth. Slowly, kiss by kiss, touch by touch, Delilah felt the fear that had gripped her for 3 years begin to loosen its hold. By mid-August, they had gathered 30 head of cattle, and Fletcher had caught and gentled 12 Mustangs. It wasn't a massive herd, but with luck and good prices, it might be enough to save the ranch. The drive to Trinidad would take 4 days through mountain passes and open territory. They loaded supplies, checked their weapons, and set out at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Daniel led the way on his steady buckskin. Delilah rode flank on her painted mare, and Fletcher brought up the rear on his big roan, his eyes constantly scanning for trouble. The first 2 days passed without incident. The cattle moved well, and the Mustangs followed Fletcher's lead horse with minimal fuss. They made camp in sheltered valleys, taking turns standing watch through the night. On the 3rd day, they descended from the high country into more open terrain, following a river valley that would lead them to Trinidad. The mountains fell away on either side, replaced by rolling grassland, broken by scattered rock formations. It was in one of these rock clusters that the Sanderson gang was waiting. They came out of the rocks like wolves, 6 riders with guns drawn. The leader, a scarred man with mean eyes, leveled his pistol at Daniel. "That's a nice herd you've got there. We'll be taking it off your hands." "The hell you will," Daniel growled, his hand moving toward his rifle. "Pa, don't!" Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. Fletcher had already moved, positioning his horse between the gang and Delilah. "There's 3 of us and 6 of you," he said calmly. "But we're dug in with a herd to shelter behind, and you're sitting out in the open. First shot fired, some of you are going down before you reach cover. Is it worth it?" The leader's eyes narrowed. Big talk for a mountain man. "Not talk. Fact." Fletcher's hand rested easy on his rifle, but there was nothing easy about his expression. This was a man who had fought in the war, who had survived in the wilderness for 5 years, who would die before he let anyone hurt the woman he loved. "We don't want trouble, but we'll give it if we have to. Or you can ride on, and we all live to see tomorrow." The tension stretched taut as a wire. Delilah could barely breathe. Her father had his rifle out now, and she slowly drew her own pistol from her saddle holster. 6 against 3 were bad odds, but Fletcher was right. In a straight fight, some of the gang would die, and they knew it. Finally, the leader spat in the dirt. "Not worth dying over," he muttered, "but you better watch your back, mountain man. This territory's dangerous." "So am I," Fletcher said quietly. The gang wheeled their horses and rode off, disappearing back into the rocks. Fletcher didn't relax until they were completely out of sight, and even then he kept his rifle across his saddle. "That was too close," Daniel said, his voice shaking slightly. "They'll probably try again once we're closer to town," Fletcher said. "We need to move fast and stay alert. Delilah, I want you in the middle of the herd from now on. Your father and I will take the exposed positions." "I can fight," she protested. "I know you can, but I can't concentrate on watching for an ambush if I'm worried about you." His eyes met hers, and she saw the fear beneath his calm exterior. "Please," she nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. He loved her, and the thought of her in danger terrified him. It was the same fear she felt for him. They pushed hard for the rest of the day, driving the herd faster than was ideal. The cattle grew restless and the horses skittish, but they couldn't afford to slow down. When they finally made camp that evening, they were less than 10 miles from Trinidad. "We'll push straight through tomorrow," Daniel decided. "Get to town by afternoon, find buyers, and get the money to the bank before they close." "What if the gang tries something tonight?" Delilah asked. "Then they try something." Fletcher was checking his weapons, his face grim. "But I don't think they will. Too risky in the dark, too easy for us to slip away with the herd. They'll wait until we're on the final stretch to town, try to hit us in daylight when they can see what they're doing." He was right. The night passed quietly, though none of them slept well. They broke camp before dawn and started the final push to Trinidad. The gang attacked at mid-morning, just as the town came into view in the distance. They came hard and fast, firing shots to stampede the herd. The cattle panicked, breaking into a run, and the Mustangs scattered. "Go with the herd," Fletcher shouted to Delilah. "Keep them together. Daniel, with me." Delilah didn't want to leave them, but she understood the plan. If the gang stole the herd, everything was lost. She kicked her mare into a gallop, racing alongside the stampeding cattle, whistling and shouting to turn them, to keep them from scattering completely. Behind her, gunfire cracked sharp in the morning air. She couldn't look back, couldn't let herself think about Fletcher and her father facing 6 armed men. She had to trust them to handle it while she did her part. It took a mile of hard riding, but she finally managed to turn the lead steers, bending the stampede into a circle until the cattle slowed and stopped, milling nervously. The Mustangs had followed, and she quickly gathered them in as well. Only then did she turn back, her heart in her throat. 2 riders were coming toward her. For a terrible moment she couldn't tell who they were, and then she recognized her father's buckskin and Fletcher's roan. Relief hit her so hard she felt dizzy. They rode up, both looking grim but uninjured. "Did we get them all?" she asked. "Wounded 2, scared off the rest," Daniel said. "Fletcher's a hell of a shot." "So are you." Fletcher scanned the herd. "You did good, Delilah. Held them together." "Are they going to come back?" "I doubt it. Not worth it with the town so close. Law would be on them before they could make off with the herd." Fletcher rode close and reached out to take her hand. "It's over. We made it." The last few miles to Trinidad were tense, but the gang didn't reappear. By early afternoon, they had the herd penned in the stockyard and were negotiating with buyers. The cattle market was strong, and the Mustangs fetched good prices from several different ranchers looking for horses to break for riding stock. When they walked out of the bank an hour before closing, Daniel had a receipt showing a payment of $325 on their loan. The ranch was safe. That night, they stayed in a hotel in Trinidad, the first real beds any of them had slept in for weeks. Delilah bathed and changed into the clean dress she had brought, then met Fletcher on the hotel's front porch. He was leaning against the railing, watching the street. He had cleaned up too, his hair wet and his jaw freshly shaved. Without the beard, she could see the strong line of his jaw, the shape of his mouth. He was devastatingly handsome, and her heart skipped a beat. "We did it," she said, joining him at the railing. "You did it. This was your fight. I just helped." He turned to her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Delilah, I've been thinking. When we get back to the ranch, I'm going to ask your father for permission to marry you, but I wanted to ask you first. Will you be my wife?" Joy flooded through her, bright and warm as sunshine. "Yes. Yes, Fletcher. I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing herself against his broad chest. His kiss was deep and thorough, full of promise and love. When they broke apart, he kept his arms around her, and she felt safe and cherished and home. "I don't have much to offer," he said against her hair. "Just myself and whatever I can build. That's everything I want." She pulled back to look up at him. "We'll build a life together, you and me and Pa. We'll make the ranch work. We'll be happy." "I believe we will." He kissed her again, softer this time. "I love you, Delilah Preston. Soon to be Delilah Wallace. I love you too." They were married in Trinidad a week later, with Daniel standing as witness and half the town attending. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Fletcher wore a new suit that made him look almost civilized, though no suit could truly tame the wildness in him. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony in the small church, and when Fletcher kissed his bride, he was careful to be gentle, aware of all the eyes on them. But later, when they returned to the ranch and Daniel made himself scarce in town for the night, Fletcher carried Delilah over the threshold of the house and up to the bedroom that was now theirs. "Are you scared?" he asked, setting her down gently. "A little," she admitted, "but I trust you. We'll go slow. If you need me to stop at any time, you just say so." He cupped her face in his hands. "This is about both of us together, not just me taking what I want." His patience and care made her love him even more. That night, Fletcher was as gentle with her as he had been with the wild horses, earning trust with every touch, every kiss. When fear rose up, he backed off, waited, let her breathe. When she reached for him, he came to her with tenderness and passion in equal measure. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Delilah was thoroughly and completely his, and he was hers. They lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and she traced the scars on his chest, the map of a hard life written on his skin. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one." She kissed his shoulder, feeling bold and happy and free. "You're mine now, Fletcher Wallace. I was always yours from the moment I caught that wagon." He pulled her closer. "I'll be yours until the day I die." The following months were full of hard work and deep happiness. Fletcher moved down from the mountains permanently, though they often took trips up to his old camp when they wanted to be alone in the wilderness. The ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. They bought more cattle with the money left over from the loan payment, hired 2 good hands who worked for fair wages, and treated Delilah with respect. Daniel seemed to grow younger with each passing week, his back straightening, his spirits lifting. He and Fletcher worked well together, and there was real affection between them. As winter approached and snow began to dust the high peaks, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening as they sat together on the porch, wrapped in a quilt against the cold. "You're sure?" he asked, his hand immediately going to her still flat stomach. "The doctor in Trinidad confirmed it yesterday when Pa and I went for supplies. The baby should come in early May." She covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Fletcher's voice was rough with emotion. "Delilah, I'm more than happy. I'm blessed." He pulled her into his lap, holding her carefully. "A baby, our baby. I never thought I'd have this again. A family, a home." "Well, you do, and we're not going anywhere." She kissed him, long and slow. "You're stuck with us." Best trap I ever fell into. Winter in the Colorado mountains was harsh but beautiful. Snow piled high, and they spent long evenings by the fire, planning for the baby, for the ranch's future, for the life they were building. Fletcher proved to be handy with woodworking, and he spent hours crafting a beautiful cradle from pine, carving it with intricate designs of mountains and horses. Daniel knitted tiny blankets, a skill his late wife had taught him, and Delilah sewed little gowns. They were prepared long before the baby was due to arrive. Spring came late, with snow lingering in the high passes until April. But by early May, the valleys were green, and the wildflowers were blooming when Delilah went into labor. It was hard and frightening, and there were hours when Delilah thought she might not survive. But Fletcher never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her she was strong, she could do this. He believed in her. When their son finally arrived in the early hours of dawn, screaming his displeasure at the world, Fletcher wept openly. He held the tiny red-faced baby with enormous care, his huge hands incredibly gentle. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're perfect. Delilah, I love you so much." "I love you too." She was exhausted but happy, watching her husband cradle their son. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, but Fletcher said, "I'd like to name him Daniel, after your father, if that's all right with you." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "Pa would love that." Daniel Preston II was a healthy, loud baby who rarely slept and demanded constant attention. Fletcher proved to be a natural father, patient with the crying, helpful with the late-night feedings, always ready to hold his son or change him or walk him when he was fussy. "You're better at this than I am," Delilah said one exhausted night after Fletcher had finally gotten little Daniel to sleep. "I'm just bigger, so he finds me more interesting." Fletcher gently laid the baby in his cradle. Besides, you're the one doing all the hard work feeding him. I just provide entertainment. The ranch continued to prosper as the year turned. They expanded their herd, bought more land, and built a new barn. Daniel Sr., now a grandfather, seemed to have found a new lease on life. He spent hours with his namesake, telling him stories about his grandmother, about the old days, about how the ranch had been and would be again. As little Daniel grew from infant to toddler, Fletcher taught him to ride almost before he could walk. The boy was fearless, laughing with delight as his father held him secure on the back of a gentle old mare. Delilah watched them together and felt her heart swell with contentment. 3 years after their wedding, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah after Fletcher's first wife. Fletcher held his daughter and cried, grieving and grateful all at once. Delilah understood. She had made peace with the ghost of Sarah Wallace, who had loved Fletcher first, and who deserved to be remembered. She would have liked you, Fletcher told Delilah that night, holding both his wife and his daughter. Sarah would have been happy I found love again. I hope so, Delilah kissed him softly. She gave me a gift by loving you first, by teaching you how to be a good husband. I'm grateful to her. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. Daniel grew tall and strong like his father, with his mother's dark eyes and warm heart. Sarah was wild and spirited, always climbing things she shouldn't, always exploring, always asking questions. Fletcher and Delilah loved them fiercely, raised them with firm kindness, taught them to work hard and treat others with respect. Daniel Sr. lived to see his grandchildren grow, to see the ranch become one of the most prosperous in the territory. He died peacefully in his sleep when Daniel was 8 and Sarah was 5, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had built and nearly lost and finally saved. He was proud of you, Fletcher told Delilah as they stood at the grave, proud of what we built together. We couldn't have done it without him, without you. She leaned into her husband's solid warmth. I'm grateful for every day we had with him. The years continued to pass, measured in seasons and children's laughter and hard work under the Colorado sun. Fletcher's hair turned gray at the temples, but he was still as strong as ever, still protective, still gentle. Delilah's hands grew rough from work, but Fletcher kissed them every night and told her they were beautiful because they showed how hard she worked to build their life. When Daniel turned 18, he took over much of the ranch operations, working alongside his father with easy competence. Sarah, at 15, was already breaking horses with skill that rivaled Fletcher's. She had inherited her father's way with animals, his patience and understanding. We did well, Delilah said one evening, sitting on the porch with Fletcher, as they had done thousands of times before. They were in their 40s now, still strong, still in love. Look at what we built. We built a life, Fletcher agreed, his arm around her shoulders, a good life. Do you ever miss the mountains, your solitary days? Not even a little, he pulled her closer. I found everything I needed right here. You, the children, this place. I'm home. Me too. Delilah rested her head on his shoulder. I'm home. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the Rockies, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the house behind them, Sarah was singing while she helped cook supper. Daniel was in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal. The ranch was alive with the sounds of family, of work, of love. Fletcher thought back to that day 20 years ago when he had caught a falling wagon and saved a frightened woman's life. He thought about how he had noticed her trembling, how he had slowed down, had let her set the pace for everything that came after. It had been the right decision, the patient decision, and it had led to this, a beautiful wife, healthy children, a thriving ranch, a life rich with love and purpose, all because he had been willing to wait, to let healing happen in its own time, to earn trust instead of demanding it. What are you thinking about? Delilah asked, tilting her face up to look at him. How grateful I am that your wagon broke that day. He kissed her forehead. Best thing that ever happened to me. Best thing that happened to both of us, she smiled. You saved my life in more ways than one, Fletcher Wallace. We saved each other. He stood, pulling her to her feet. Come on, Mrs. Wallace, let's go have supper with our family. Hand in hand, they walked into the house, into the warmth and light and laughter. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnessing another day in the life of the Wallace Ranch, another chapter in a love story that had begun with patience and grown into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down to Daniel and eventually to his children. The Wallace name would become synonymous with good horses, fair dealing, and strong family values. People in Trinidad would tell the story of the mountain man who had come down from the wilderness and saved the Preston ranch, who had fallen in love with a broken woman and had the patience to wait for her to heal. But Fletcher and Delilah didn't think about their legacy or their story. They simply lived it, day by day, loving each other, raising their children, working the land they loved. They had their arguments and hard times like any couple, but they never forgot the foundation they had built in those early days: trust, patience, respect, and a love that had been allowed to grow at its own pace. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Delilah back up to his old camp in the mountains. The lean-to was gone, reclaimed by weather and time, but the clearing was still there, peaceful and beautiful. They stood together looking out over the valley, over the ranch they could see in the distance. "Thank you," Delilah said softly. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for never pushing, for loving me enough to let me heal in my own time." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears. "You gave me back my life, Fletcher. You taught me that I could be loved without being hurt." "You taught me I could love again," he replied, cupping her face in his hands, "that I didn't have to live alone in the mountains hiding from the world. You gave me a reason to live again, not just survive." They kissed as the wind whispered through the pines, as an eagle soared overhead, as the mountains watched with eternal patience. Two people who had found each other at the right moment, who had built something beautiful from broken pieces, who had proven that love with patience could overcome any obstacle. When they rode back down to the ranch that evening, Sarah ran out to meet them, her long braid flying behind her. "Ma! Pa! The mare foaled! Daniel says it's the prettiest colt we've ever had." They dismounted and followed their daughter to the barn, where their son was indeed admiring a leggy bay colt with a white star on his forehead. The ranch hands were there too, and there was laughter and excitement as everyone admired the new addition. Fletcher put his arm around Delilah's waist as they watched the colt wobble on uncertain legs, watched the mare nuzzle him encouragingly. This was life, he thought, birth and growth, family and work, love and patience. This was what it was all about. "I love you," he murmured into Delilah's hair. "I love you too," she replied, leaning into him, "always." The years continued to roll on, bringing challenges and triumphs in equal measure. A bad winter that killed some cattle, a wet spring that brought abundant grass. Daniel's wedding to a sweet girl from town named Emily. Sarah's announcement that she wanted to become a horse trainer professionally, not just help on the ranch. More grandchildren, filling the house with noise and joy. Through it all, Fletcher and Delilah remained the steady center, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies moving a little slower, but their devotion to each other never wavering. On a cool autumn evening when they were both in their 60s, they sat on the porch once more, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, as they had been for over 40 years. "No regrets?" Fletcher asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night so long ago. "Not a single one," Delilah replied, the same answer she'd given then. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "But maybe we needed the time we had apart to become the people who could build this life together." "Maybe so." She smiled at him, the smile that still made his heart skip a beat even after all these years. "We made something good, didn't we? We made something beautiful." He looked out over the ranch, over the well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, the land that had been cared for and loved. "And it all started because I slowed down and let you set the pace. Best decision you ever made. Best decision we ever made," he corrected. "You trusted me enough to try. That took courage." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. Inside the house, their family was gathering for Sunday dinner, as they did every week. Soon, Sarah would call them in, and they would sit at a table full of children and grandchildren, sharing food and stories and love. But for now, in this quiet moment, it was just the two of them. The mountain man who had come down from the wilderness and the broken woman who had learned to trust again. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a legacy through patience and love. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the ranch spread out below them, a testament to what two people could create when they honored each other's needs, when they moved at a pace that allowed healing and growth, when they loved without demanding, when they built on a foundation of trust and respect. Fletcher Wallace and Delilah Preston Wallace had created more than a successful ranch. They had created a love story that would echo through generations, a reminder that the strongest foundations are built slowly, with patience and care, brick by brick, day by day, at a pace that honors both hearts involved. And it all began with a mountain man who noticed a woman trembling at his touch, who had the wisdom and compassion to slow down, to step back, to let her set the pace for both of them. That single act of respect and patience had blossomed into a lifetime of love, and neither of them would have changed a single moment of it. As they finally rose to join their family for dinner, Fletcher helped Delilah to her feet with the same gentle care he had shown her that first day. She smiled up at him, her eyes still holding the warmth and love that had grown over 4 decades together. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she replied. "As long as I'm with you." And hand in hand, they walked into the house, into the warmth and light and love they had built together, two souls who had found each other in the wild Colorado mountains and had created something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy not just of land and prosperity, but of love, patience, and the understanding that the best things in life are worth waiting for. The end.